Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining part 2 of our Town Hall series on long-term care. My name is Tashia Edwards, and I am the President of the Board of Directors for the Toronto Council on Aging, also known as the TCA. The TCA is a nonprofit charitable organization that addresses the issues and concerns of older adults in Toronto. Events such as today's webinar allow us to bring to the forefront issues that impact older adults and to also engage with our TCA community to determine viable solutions. In part 1 of our Town Hall series, we discuss strategies for advocating for positive change for long-term care residents, their caregivers, as well as staff. And we also introduce the idea of community-based solutions. In today's webinar, we will learn more about alternative models of care, such as naturally occurring retirement communities, commonly referred to as Norks, as well as explore the benefits of aging in place. Before we begin, we will take a moment to have a land acknowledgement. Today, the TCA acknowledges that we are on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, and the Haudenosaunee, as well as the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. The Council also acknowledges that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13, signed by the Mississaugas of the Credit, and the Williams Treaties signed with multiple bands. I am delighted to introduce our moderator for today, Josh Matlow. Josh was elected to Toronto City Council in October 2010, and is now serving his third term as City Councillor for Ward 12, Toronto St. Paul's. Josh is a community advocate and has helped to develop a strategic plan to create an age-friendly city for Toronto's seniors. Most importantly for the TCA, Josh is a friend and supporter of our organization. We are very happy to have him moderate our webinar today. Welcome, Josh, and I will now hand it over to you.
Thank you so much, Tasha, and welcome to everybody. It is a pleasure to be back with you. I thought that the town hall that we held with regard to the state of long-term care and where do we go from here, I thought was an incredibly thoughtful discussion. But as we discussed, long-term care has to be improved, has to be safe, has to be emotion-focused and caring environment. But it's not the only option that should be provided to people who are aging in our society. There needs to be options that allow people to age in place, but along with aging in place, knowing that they have the supports and the community around them to be able to age in place well. Norks, naturally occurring retirement communities, is a model for just what I described, where people come together, provide services and supports together while living in their homes and in the neighborhoods that they may be very well acquainted with. By doing so, it defeats isolation, loneliness, and contributes to longevity, health, and a better quality of life. We have some wonderful panelists today who devote their energies, their time, and their expertise towards making more of these Norks a reality and ensuring that we as a society and government do what we can to support their initiatives. So I'm going to introduce our first panelist who has not arrived yet, but I want to make sure that I do the introductions at the top of the meeting. Because regardless of whether Christine is able to get through the technological obstacle course of arriving at this meeting or not, any meeting discussing Norks should just have her introduced, even if she wasn't going to be here in the first place, because she is a superstar. And I think that we all just need to acknowledge Christine, and I hope that she's able to arrive. Christine Mcmillan is the founder of Oasis Seniors Supportive Living. Christine is one of the past presidents of the Frontenac Kingston Council on Aging. She is the founder of the Oasis program, an innovative model of care meant to decrease social isolation, bring services directly to seniors in their homes, and give them more autonomy over their own lives. Christine was responsible for initiating the first Oasis program in Kingston, Ontario, over a decade ago, and then expanding the program to Toronto a few years later. And might I add, I was so excited about what she did in Kingston that I ended up working with her on the Oasis project on Walmer Road. And she really is a hero to me. And again, I hope she's able to arrive here, but I think she's always worth mentioning given her leadership. I'd like to introduce Simone Parniak, Oasis Research Project Manager. Hello, Simone. Simone is a research project manager with the Oasis Expansion and Evaluation Project at the School of Rehabilitation Therapy of Queen's University. She is a qualitative researcher by training with an interest in health policy, health equity, community development, participatory research, and aging in place. Simone holds an MA in Women's Studies and a Bachelor's of Science in Health Sciences from the University of Ottawa. Welcome. Dr. Catherine Donnelly. Welcome, Catherine. Catherine is the Director of Health Services and Policy Research Institute at Queen's University. Dr. Donnelly is currently the Director of Health. I'm repeating that because I've got it twice in front of me. My apologies. But it was worth mentioning. She is one of the lead investigators of the Oasis Model Expansion and Evaluation Project. Her research team has partnered with McMaster University and Western University to take a participatory action approach to expand the Oasis program to new sites across Ontario. Catherine is an instructor in both the occupational therapy and aging and health programs, and is a practicing occupational therapist with the Queen's Family Health Team's Belleville site. Welcome, Catherine. You were worth mentioning twice. And then finally, but certainly not least, my friend who I've known for many years and another great leader, Sue Lantz, founder and managing director of Collaborative Aging. Sue is an aging policy expert and consultant who specializes in aging, caregiving, and collaborative models of health and community care. She is the author of Options Open, the guide for mapping your best aging journey. Sue is also the founder and managing director of Collaborative Aging. In addition to consulting, Sue has built her skills and expertise by holding various leadership roles within the public and private healthcare delivery sectors. To our panelists, we are so grateful to have you here in support of the TCA and in support of a conversation that has to be had many, many times as we build whatever the new normal will look like, and we talk about build back better. Well, aging in place and doing it well is certainly part of that plan. So I'd like to ask for the panelists, I understand that that each of you are going to say a few words to just present a little bit about who you are and the work you do, and of course anything you'd like to share. So I'm going to start with Sue to begin.
Oh, great. Thanks, Josh. I'm going to share my screen, so let's hope that this works well. I have a few slides to take you through. So I'm Sue Lantz, and as Josh says, I am the Managing Director of Collaborative Aging. And I'm going to talk a little bit about aging in place models and why the Nork is such a great model. I really love this model. So here we go. Really, the work that I've been doing over the last year or so is all about expanding the options for aging in place. And COVID has really shown us that the options we have aren't enough and they're not robust enough. And we certainly don't have enough emphasis on community-based models for aging in place. So this is really about trying to sort of understand how I look at aging in place and why we can embark on a process that will expand the options for aging in place. So we'll talk about the Nork. just a word about what is aging in place. And I think one of the things that I've found in my travels is we use this term a lot, and it's a technical term, which is the ability to live in the same home or community safely, independently, and comfortably as you age. But actually, I see it as much broader than that. And I see it as really a personal vision that we set for ourselves and a set of actions that we lead. And it really turns out that if we do approach the idea of aging in place from the perspective of having some foresight and proactivity, this allows us to set up much more collaborative relationships with others and to set ourselves up for success in terms of finding the best options for aging in place that suit us. So I won't go into a lot of detail on this, but I guess I want to just highlight the fact that we are at the beginning point of mapping out the new options, in my view, for aging in the right places with the right supports. We have lots of great pilot projects and models out there, but we need to bring them to scale. And the naturally occurring retirement community model is one of the most promising new options in Canada. It's been around in New York State for a number of years, but we really haven't brought it here to Canada. So this is exciting. And in the context of aging in place, I just want to introduce the Options Open Guide that Josh mentioned at the outset. This guide is written as an easy-to-read self-navigation tool to help you think through what actually makes the best sense for you in terms of aging in place. And it really sets in motion with some curiosity and some good evidence-based information, some ideas and tips for how you can lead your own thinking and mapping of your best aging experience. And I bring into that a travel planning approach, which is that you wouldn't get on a plane without thinking through where you're going, who you're going with, what you want to experience, how much money you have to spend on that vacation, the risks you might encounter, and really at the end of the day, you've done a lot of legwork to make sure you have a good experience on that holiday, and you get on the plane and you can kind of relax. So why not take that same approach with our own aging experiences? If we have curiosity and a positive mindset about our aging in later life, especially if we're in our 60s and 70s, we will live into our 80s and 90s. The odds are, as Dr. Samir Sinha says, the stats are that we will live long. So how do you do the early research and proactive planning and make preparations over time that set you up for a good experience? So I propose a 5-strategy framework for planning your best aging in place experience. And really this is based on some of the existing models like age-friendly community planning and other of our best science on what makes a great aging in place experience. And it's really 5 things: maintaining your health, making wise housing choices, continuing to expand your social networks and connections, building and preparing a caregiving team, and really making the most of your resources. And resources, I mean by that money and other social resources, technology, community assets. And when we take this 5-strategy lens, it allows us to sort of think through our plans and preparations and mix and match like a Rubik's Cube the different options that give us the best for our health, our housing, our social networks, caregiving team, and our use of our money. We can also use this framework at a more system level to discover and spark innovative and modern options, just like the Nork. So I won't go through these in detail because we don't have a lot of time, but really, essentially, it's all about maintaining our best health, informed choices, collaborative relationships with peers and clinicians. It's about our housing choices that ensures lasting affordability, adaptability to our physical changes over time, with social design elements so that it allows us to connect to others, making sure we're located in the right place, and looking at more inclusive, not segregated housing options. Our social networks are key to our growth, our brain health, and our continued sort of resilience. And really, it's about continuing to build our supportive relationships, both with friends, chosen family, neighbors, and continuing to learn as we age. We learn through our relationships and with people. Caregiving team, on the caregiving team side, really what I'm saying is that a caregiving team is a mix of people who are unpaid and paid. And you can do a number of things to select and prepare that team for a good experience. And resources is all about leveraging the different resources you have. I'm going to move to sort of just say that when you look at the 5 strategy lens that I'm talking about in Options Open, and then you hear more about the Nork model, you're going to see those 5 strategies in action: the senior leadership, the choice to stay in your current home, the socially supportive model, choice and agency about the types of supports you arrange, some cost efficiencies, and housing providers playing a key role. So we have lots we can do to prepare and build up the models for aging in the right places, at the right supports, with seniors like Christine taking the lead. She's shown us the way on how we can do this. And at a system level, we need structural and funding and policy changes that really will support and enable these kinds of innovative models, such as the Nork, for aging in place. And that takes a collaborative model, nonprofit organizations, governments, and businesses supporting individual seniors, neighbors, and communities. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sue. That was wonderful. And I saw Christine arrive, and I think that she will probably take another moment to come back. So on that note, I'm going to go to Catherine, if you would, to be our next presenter.
We will be nimble.
We do this together. We're a team.
Exactly. Thanks so much for having us here today. And as Christine gets on, this might be a nice segue anyway. And so really what I wanted to talk to today a little bit about, just to pick up what Sue has introduced, is this concept of a Nork. And every time I say a Nork, my sister laughs at me. She thinks it sounds so funny. But once you say it a lot, it just flows naturally. And so in terms of what exactly is a Nork, and so I even smile when I say it. And so really it's merely a pocket of a geographical area with a high proportion of older adults. So in and itself, it's not even necessarily a model, but it's a way of how we describe a geography. And so a Nork could just be a Nork, and again, people might not even know that they're living in a Nork. But when we talk about more of a model, we're talking about taking a Nork and actually bringing supportive service programs to the geographical area. And that's when we have a program such as you'll hear about when Christine gets back on the line, and Simone will talk about something called an Oasis, which is a program that we call, it's a Nork-based program. So once you can identify these Norks, you can actually bring services and programs to these geographical areas, and that's what makes them so compelling. And we really haven't leveraged them in any way, shape, or form to the extent that we can. And as Sue has mentioned, the term was coined in 1986 in the US. And so I would say that the biggest density of Norks, of social supportive service program Norks, would be in New York City. And that is, those programs are a little bit more healthcare oriented and healthcare run. And the one that Christine's going to be talking to today is definitely much more driven by the older adults themselves. I thought I would share my screen ever so briefly and just talk a little bit about Norks and what they might look like here in Ontario. I'm just going to talk about how you might identify them, because there is no set sort of standard of what a Nork is. So if you look in the literature, it ranges anywhere sort of between 40 to 50% of a geographical area. That ranges anywhere between sort of 55 and 65 years and older. And so we wanted to explore what in Ontario things are looking like, just to get a sense of how many Norks there could be and how we might be able to use these to our advantage. So we used the Canadian Census data, and we used something called a dissemination area, which is a small geographic pocket between 400 and 700 people. So very small, like a little neighborhood. And what we did was we wanted to look at the proportion of older adults. We called 55 and older if there was 40% of adults, 55 and older, we called it a Nork. And you can actually see visually how interesting this map of Ontario looks. And so if you think of the red and the orange at the top as being sort of these higher density areas. So the top map is 2006, and you can see in just 10 years, we had 8.7 of these dissemination areas in the province, what we would classify as Norks. And by 2016, 20% of Ontario would be what we considered Norks. And so I'll just show you one more map here. This is Toronto region, and you can see not necessarily right densely in Toronto, but the surrounding areas, just how many Norks that there are, again, to Sue's point, that we could really think about how we might capitalize on and think about how we might look at older adults and aging a bit differently.
Catherine, that was wonderful, and I appreciate your presentation. So go ahead, Simone. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Josh. Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for inviting me to speak today. I am as Josh said, the research project manager of the Oasis evaluation and expansion work that has been going on since 2018. And so in our first round of the project, we received some funds from the Ministry of Health and the Ministry for Seniors and Accessibility in Baycrest to expand the original Oasis model as it was in Kingston, Ontario, to some new locations across the project. And now we've recently received funds from the Canadian Institutes for Health Research to continue that evaluation, looking at health and well-being outcomes over the next 4 years. So typical activities really fall within what we've identified as 3 pillars that are central to Oasis programming. And these focus primarily on social, physical activity, and nutrition. So quite a variety of different types of activities, including things like line dancing and pole walking, but also a community kitchen where folks got together to prepare meals and eat them together or bring them to their neighbors who might want a home-cooked meal, to things like coffee hour and crafting. So a huge variety. I think what I will say is, because the rec center is separate from the person's home, people might identify it as a challenge in that people have to actually travel to get to the rec center to participate in activities. But what we saw were quite a few people were able to walk or to drive themselves, but also the community stepped in to carpool and really ensure that everyone was able to participate. And so that was a really great thing to see. And so we really didn't encounter any barriers in terms of participation. I think where I'll probably end off right now is to say that obviously Oasis has been impacted by the pandemic. We would say it's kind of paused at the moment, but that's not to say that folks haven't stayed connected. So there's been, emailing and phone calls, and in the summer when the weather was nice, people were gathering in the parking lot safely to have coffee together. I know that everyone is very much excited and looking forward to be able to reconnect together in person, because that's really what Oasis is all about. And so I think perhaps I'll leave it at that, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much. And thank you for sharing more about the Oasis program and the work that you do. I'm going to ask you a few questions, and then I'm going to open it up to the audience and the participants who've joined us this evening from the community. I'm going to begin with Catherine. We've discussed sort of in general about why we all like Norks, and yes, that was funny. About sort of, it kind of reminds me of like, I'm Mork from Nork, but we recognize the importance of it. Could you sort of put it in a nutshell? Why do you believe Norks improve the lives of older adults? Why should somebody, in your opinion, choose that as an option?
Mm-hmm. It's a good question. And, it's interesting because the term was coined in '86, which is some time ago now. There's really very little research that's been done on them, really. There's been, and Simone spearheaded a review of the literature that we're just finishing up, and we found 61 articles, which sounds like a lot, but isn't a lot really for how long they've really been around. And there isn't necessarily strong evidence, but that's what we're tasked to do in our work. But what we do know about Norks is that they have been shown to have a positive impact on social connections, isolation. We know they also have some early evidence on physical health as well, specifically thinking about falls. Just it gets people out of the house and engaged socially. We also have been doing some interesting work looking, and we've done this, some preliminary work, particularly with the original Oasis, where we were able to take the Oasis building and we looked at a comparable matched non-Oasis building. And we actually wanted to look at health utilization outcomes, because we were thinking, you know, if we believe that Oasis in a NORC-based program benefits health and, you know, facilitates healthy aging and aging in place, we wanted to see what that really looked like for health use. And so what we found in this early research is that it was able, compared to the match site, people were able to, if they went to long-term care, stay at home for a median 1 year longer. So, you know, when we say it keeps people at home longer, we actually have some real evidence to suggest that that really is the case. We also, and again, this idea that it builds social connections, and those connections actually help people help each other out. We hear stories all the time. We know that so-and-so's away right now, but we're looking after their house. They need a little bit of extra help getting down to the grocery store. And so our research also found that people who were in the Oasis building actually used home care services 45% less. They were 45% less likely to use them, which is quite phenomenal. So you can only imagine if we enhanced home care use and people were in NORCs, you know, how much longer, maybe even, again, this is all sort of projecting, but what they could do. So again, there's good early evidence, and we're really interested in collecting more and looking at how this could be used in a lot of different environments.
Thank you. And Sue, the federal budget was recently released, and they announced that there's going to be a $90 million investment over 3 years in an Age Well at Home initiative. And that's going to start for 2021, 2022. Now, you and I have worked together at the City of Toronto at the Accountability Table on our senior strategy. From your experience thus far, how would you suggest that the average person advocate for all levels of government to support NORCs and their success?
Well, I guess the thing that I would say is that the Age Well at Home initiative is not fully defined, but certainly the Nork model is one of the most promising models. And I guess what, you know, it does take all levels of government, and it does take certainly, I guess there's the seniors advocacy avenue, and I'm sorry, my dog has just barked. And there is the working with the political channels, there's all the councils on aging, there's several advocacy sort of mechanisms we can use to animate these ideas and really advocate for better funding at the federal level, or at least more alignment of funding. And already some advocates have been saying we really need to strengthen the community support functions in the community. And those are the things that Catherine was mentioning. Things like, you know, community kitchens, shared meals, exercise programs, social activities, all of these organic ways we connect help keep us happy, healthy, and continuing to grow. So I think we need to kind of hit on all levels when it comes to advocating with the federal government for both the Age Well at Home funding, but even looking at the announced money around long-term care redevelopment. You know, $3 billion, this kind of program is so much more cost effective. And I just think we need to really press hard and be noisy about the options we want. And so the NARC model is a definite example of aging well at home. And you know, let's press as many of our emails to MPs and local councillors, MPPs, and get noisier about what we want. Right, and Christine has modeled this at every level of the last 10 years of her work. She has the rule book, the playbook for us, and we can follow it.
I can tell you, Christine, you know, speaking as a local city councillor, I never had an option but to agree with Christine. She brought me to her home. You know, we ended up having a meeting. I think she even invited me to her birthday party. I mean, she just basically wouldn't let me go. And that determination pays off. What I'm hearing from you, Sue, is that when there are announcements about, big budget envelopes that even have some relationship with aging in any way, we should be advocating for at least a portion of that envelope to be dedicated to Norks as an option that would both support Norks themselves, but could even mitigate the expenses and the impacts on long-term care and other programs.
Absolutely. And Christine would tell this story that when she first started Oasis Kingston, some of the people that were living in the building were on the wait list for long-term care homes. And many of them were lonely, eating tea and toast, as she would say, for dinner. And they were often sometimes caregivers themselves and isolated even more because of their caregiver role. And so all of those factors are what precipitate the need to go into a long-term care home. And with the Oasis model, I'm not saying it solves everything, but she cared for her husband that had dementia in the later stages in her home with the Oasis model as a support to her and her husband. So yeah, as you say, I think when there's big money on the table talking about long-term care, we should also be eking in there with, wait a minute, there's some other options here.
Yeah, thank you. Well said. And Simone, we often find ourselves, given that many of us are living in cities, and we talk about Norks through the context of living in Toronto or living in Kingston, and they're often buildings, they're neighborhoods. But do you think that they can work in less urban and rural communities as a model? Is that possible in your opinion?
Thanks. So that's an interesting question. I would say yes, it's possible. I think when we look at the literature about Norks, it is heavily focused on urban centers and specifically apartment buildings. And so we don't know a whole lot about what it might look in a neighborhood or in a more rural area. But I think it really comes down to working within the community and identifying what resources and supports are required, and then mobilizing together as a community. So I certainly do think it is possible.
Thank you. And Catherine, even in the midst of the pandemic, I co-authored a letter with people like Dr. Samir Sinha and Nathan Stahl and other experts, advocating for Norks to be destinations to send mobile vaccination units. Right. So that is just one example. Can when you think about sort of the other uses or purposes for Norks, as far as even just an advantage to have a concentrated demographic where you can provide services, perhaps at better cost, et cetera. I mean, have you thought through that as far as just how they can, improve even delivery of services?
Yeah, I mean, we've definitely, and again, the key thing about Oasis particularly, and a lot of these Nork-based programs, is they're founded on this notion of seniors, older adult empowerment and self-determination. So, older adults determining what they want and then bringing those services to them. So again, sort of that orientation away from services to actually the people in the neighborhoods. And so, one of my areas of research and interest and my area of practice is looking at primary care. And so, primary care is on the ground working with communities. And so primary care hasn't necessarily leveraged this concept of Norks, but if we're talking about like sort of health service delivery, and that's not necessarily what Norks are about, but there could be really interesting ways that, for instance, primary care teams work and identify the Norks that are in their geography and think about deploying services to these geographical areas. As an occupational therapist, I would often be in the office thinking about programs for older adults, and we would house them in the clinic. Whereas why wouldn't we just rethink things and turn our lens to older adults and figure out what they want, where they want them? And so there's these natural agencies that work in the community but don't often think about geography. They think about where they're sitting in their offices. So again, just rethinking. We had the Canadian Hearing Society, for instance, do hearing clinics in one of the Norks. And that was because the older adults themselves identified, this is what we'd like. So we went out and essentially matched those services together. So it's, older adults doing the identification and then trying to convince the services to think differently.
And Sue, did you want to opine?
Yeah, I was just going to add to this that one of the Open Lab group at University Health Network has done such amazing work in supporting the Nork Oasis model and kind of pioneering it. And one of the roles they describe is an ambassador model. And that when I think of Christine Mcmillan, and when I hear Catherine talking about sort of the neighbors taking the lead, there are a few people who often sort of step up and act as an ambassador on behalf of their of a group. They get things started, and there's a process to that, and a learning, and a kind of a role that's emerging. And the Open Lab team and Jen Recknagel are a contact point for that kind of almost programmatic element. And I don't mean to over formalize it, but it takes some leadership. And so I think it's really important as people listen to this model and hear more about how it works, that they think about the idea of becoming an ambassador in their own Nork area. If they know there's a lot of seniors in their building, they can step up and play that kind of lead role and start to do the organizing that Simone was talking about in a group, and broadening the activities, seeing what people want to organize, self-organize, and more. So just wanted to kind of do a shout out to the Open Lab group who did the vaccine rollout in the Toronto Nork, who led that work, and who are leading the work on the ambassadors and other aspects of Oasis implementation.
Along with ensuring that volunteers would come together even early in the pandemic to make sure that seniors in buildings where there's lower income could receive their groceries.
Yes.
So I've got one final question that I'm going to just give to all of you, given that Christine just isn't able to receive it. And then given the time that we have, I'm going to go a little early and then go just right to the audience and allow them to lead us as to what we answer. So the last question I wanted to ask you all, to the best of your ability, is there will be, everybody's different. There are going to be some older adults who are going to have concerns about living independently because they're going to believe that they're going to need some support that you could find, for example, at an LTC. There are others who will be of a lower income bracket who will wonder, is a Nork going to be affordable to me? How can I get in there? There are going to be concerns that just individuals have based on their own circumstances. How do you believe that, whether it be municipalities, province, federal government, developers, and other citizens, how do you believe, and I know this is a lot in there, but how do you believe we can best work together to ensure that that Norks are accessible, inclusive, contribute to social cohesion, and affordable to all?
I'll jump in. Just a few things jump to mind, but obviously Sue and Simone will add to this. We didn't talk about the partnerships with the landlords, and I'm going to say how crucial that is, and how they're also a strong voice for advocacy as well. And I think because we have worked with a whole host of different landlords, all the way from like a social housing model, thinking about that it really can be accessible for any sphere. Like, we intentionally looked at diverse different apartments and living situations to see if we could replicate this, and we can. So I think, to your point, can they be for everybody? Yes, I think they can, most definitely. And it's really just a matter of how deep of services that you offer to bring people together. So for instance, the ambassador program might be a great option, a lighter touch model, so to speak, for someone who might have a lot of older adults that might be in a highly resourced area that might have capacity. Whereas you might have more full-time supports on site for an area that might be less resourced, for example. And there might be, a greater number of supports per person, for instance. So I think there's lots of things that you can change around about the model. And it's really just about, putting the money and the resources to the areas, if that's your intention. But I guess I just wanted to say the landlords are a crucial component that can make this work anywhere.
Yeah, thank you. Simone?
I think just to add to Catherine's point, and I've been keeping my eye on the questions in the chat, is that something that we haven't really talked about are potential other models of supporting older adults. And so a program like Oasis might not be something of interest, but there are things like intergenerational housing or the village model. So I think that it's really thinking about, we have this really promising opportunity to be able to identify these communities that may require support. And there can be flexibility on how we do that. But I think it's really about engaging the communities, and it's exciting time, I think. But just thinking about the different opportunities that are out there, that there truly isn't a one size fits all, but it's just about leveraging what exists and looking into how we can support these communities.
Thank you. And Sue?
I was just going to say that, in building on what Catherine and Simone have said, that if you look at back to the 5 strategies and the Nork model, housing is a key piece of it. And the landlord in the Oasis model in Kingston was very supportive of adapting the building and even creating a more common space where people could convene for activities and for social programs and for meals. There was a PSW in partnership with one of the agencies in Kingston. There was supportive services that were brought in on site, and that allowed for the residents in the building to access a person to help them with some navigational questions or issues or needs as they needed to. And so there was ready available that kind of support as an element of the model. Then there were the seniors taking the lead, and in so doing, they not only were shaping the care or the kinds of services and supports and activities, they were also helping one another and forming almost neighborly caregiving teams. And so they were the basis that they are helping one another as caregivers, if you will. And so when you think of the elements of the Nork Oasis model and the ingredients, it's a very resourceful model. And I think that it hasn't been tested in Canada in terms of whether it works in a condo building, but it could, I think. I think it could work in co-owned buildings or cooperatively operated housing buildings. It could be a Nork, a mini Nork could be set up in a small, like 8-plex. So I guess scale is another area, and ownership models of housing. We haven't really discovered those yet. So just sort of to help illustrate some of the key elements and how transferable they may be to other housing types or situations, including the rural area.
I guess it is about scale, and sort of if you're in an 8-plex, you may be able to maybe hire catering to come and do communal lunches, but you won't be able to hire the New York Philharmonic to visit.
No.
Just kind of, it depends
Right.
on what your ambitions are. I
was just going to add one other thing that we haven't really kind of dealt with, the fact that in addition to kind of the basic supports that we're talking about, more home care and more kind of health-oriented home care can be added in, right? So if you've got the basic supports where you are in the Nork, if one person requires more health-oriented services, that can be layered on. I just wanted to clarify that.
No, that's an important reminder for those who might wonder if they do need that support, does that work for them? So thank you. Thank you so much, all of you, for your really thoughtful and informative ideas and responses. I would like to go now to everybody participating in this conversation who have joined us in the audience.
And the first question is, how will Oasis model transition as a result of the pandemic?
So why don't we start with Catherine?
And I'm going to lean heavily on Simone here, because really she's been the glue over the pandemic last year, and really reaching out to each of the Oasis communities, connecting via weekly emails, and also thinking about videos each week. Simone, I'm going to let you talk a little bit more, because it has been a challenge, we won't lie, and it has been a struggle, and we're eagerly counting the days to get back in person.
Thanks for your candor. Simone.
Sure. So Yes, to echo Catherine, it has been a challenge, and we had to transition quite quickly, as you know, because everything happened in March of last year. So, and none of us were prepared for it. So I would say in terms of transitioning, I think that the Oasis model post-COVID will go back to in-person programming. But I think what we've learned is that there's a way to incorporate virtual connections to that. So for example, we've used Microsoft Teams to host guest speakers, but people can join by telephone or by computer because we know that not everyone has internet or a computer to use. And so that's a way to bring in speakers from all over the place and not just the local area. And so that's something that's really cool that could be used moving forward. But I don't think that, you know, the virtual piece of it is great, and I think it's good to continue that in the meantime. But I don't think that gets to really the heart of what Oasis is. And so I know that people are eager to get reconnected in person and have that cup of coffee. And so it'll definitely go back to that post-pandemic.
Thank you. And that makes a lot of sense.
Can one of the panelists talk a bit about how to engage seniors in taking charge and being leaders like Christine?
Sue, would you like to begin?
Sure. The Open Lab team have created sort of an approach called the Ambassadors Program, which was kind of built on some early work on something called Seniors Taking Charge. And I think what that is a combination of kind of support in terms of how to organize groups, how to organize and facilitate discussions around priorities and needs, and really how to take the lead in terms of set up a structure that allows participatory action. So if you want more information on the ambassadors component of the Nork Oasis model, I suggest we give Jen Recknagel's coordinates at Open Lab, because there is some rigor to it, and it's a kind of a growing, obviously it's key to expanding the Oasis model.
You know, I think part of what we saw in the development of the new Oasis sites across Ontario is that when we went into the buildings, people weren't necessarily there to be self-advocates, actually, but they realized that they connected and they had this passion for being able to maintain this Oasis site. So, you know, it's about developing the skills. Like, people don't necessarily aren't naturally advocates. You know, it can make people feel uncomfortable. So, you know, it's really learning from each other and starting small, you know, talking to your counselor, for instance, you know, who are very approachable, and, you know, starting small and just having small connections like that. So, you know, it is a skill, and not everyone's just going to feel comfortable naturally jumping in. So I think, you know, just by being in a group of individuals with a common goal, that itself develops confidence to do that.
I would just add that it's about, like, really from the starting point, just really having that involvement. So for example, for us, like, the Oasis members formed an interview panel to hire the coordinators that were going to be working with them. So, like, there was no piece of it that it wasn't about what they wanted and having their involvement. And I think that's really important for people to be passionate and invested in a program, because they're creating it.
So the next question is, it sounds like Norks deal with those who already have living arrangements that they can afford. What about people who do not have homes and find rental options not attainable because of cost?
Yeah, so this connects again with sort of the question about affordability, which is hitting almost every demographic in our society today. Who could speak to this about sort of making Norks more accessible and affordable to those who typically wouldn't be able to get in there? Catherine?
Well, I'm just going to bring it up again. Like, Norks themselves aren't affordable or not affordable. They're just geographies. So, you know, I think it's really about making sure that when we identify Norks, we're also identifying the socioeconomic features of Norks as well, which we can do, and we have done. So there's the Ontario Marginalization Index. It's a complex sort of multifactorial elements of what we think about, you know, resources that people have. So we can actually look at not only the geographical areas Norks, but we can actually look at the Norks in terms of how much resources each one has access to. So again, you know, there's Norks in areas that are affordable, and there's Norks in areas that are not affordable. So I think we can't think of them as like they're just fancy and they're just in high sort of financial areas. They're really anywhere. And so it's a matter of, if we really want to look at supporting older adults in areas that might have sort of more resource needs, that's who we should target then. So we can target Norks specifically in lower income areas, for instance. It doesn't get at the challenge of finding a place to live, but at least if we can target those areas of most need, that's where we might bring more supportive services to.
Just to supplement that question, it just occurs to me that like, 400 Walmer and they're typically in larger apartment buildings where we will find Norks. In lieu of a tenants association, or perhaps even alongside a tenants association, do you see opportunities for, like, given that we're bringing people together as more of a collective, that when they do talk to their landlord and say, listen, maybe you don't need to, I don't know, ask for an above the guideline rent increase this year, or things that can help them be more affordable. Do you see opportunities for that collective voice to be useful in that area when dealing with the landlord to make things more affordable, frankly?
I was going to say that, the thing that Catherine's pointing out is that you need housing to show up in the Nork geographic designation. And so the Nork model in itself, or the assisted, like the supportive partnership part of a Nork, doesn't solve the housing problem. And it certainly doesn't solve the affordable housing problem. So we have to, that's a separate stream of activity that we need to continue on the path of expanding the housing options that have not only affordability features, but also some basic accessibility features, so that seniors who are on limited incomes can find housing and stay in housing that has that lasting affordability. Because the risk of precarious housing and rent increases and so on, it's a deal breaker for people. So that's almost like, that's a whole other initiative in itself. And I know the city's working hard on that, Josh, and we have to keep the pedal to the metal on that, because there are more people aging, and there are more aging people that are going to be on limited incomes. So it's serious, but I do think what might start to happen if some of these partnership models of Oasis style start developing in certain housing buildings that are affordable, this is going to be a magnet for people and a real help for them to choose the buildings they may try to apply to or get into. And so my hope is that it becomes a way of people navigating to the right buildings for themselves if they can have the choice. But we need more supply of housing to have choice. We need more housing co-ops. We just need more. It's serious.
But I think what we're all saying is that we want Norks to be affordable, but it's not just about Norks. We need our cities and our communities to be affordable wherever Norks might find themselves.
Right.
So back to you, Tasha.
Okay. So there's a lot of questions where the audience is asking, how do you get a Nork started?
I mean, we can talk about, how we started to expand the Oasis in the different Norks that we reached out to. And it really started with coffee. And, sitting in the front lobby, and I'm just thinking back to the days, Simone, it started as a little snowball, I guess I would describe it. One person comes, then another person comes, and there's a little bit of a buzz in the room, and then a few more people join. And then what happens is it really becomes almost a movement. And so, you're in the elevator, and then you tell your friend, you should come down, we're meeting for coffee. So, to Simone's point again, and, we didn't do anything without it being really driven by the older adults in the building themselves. So like we provided some sort of venue and some impetus, but really starting to have it so it's a model and a place that they would like to go to. I know that, when I'm working clinically, oftentimes I would work with someone and said, you might really like to join this program. It might be interesting. And I don't know how many people say, I don't like programs. I don't join programs. There's something about it being in a place that they live, where they design it themselves, that it becomes an extension of their own living room, like going to the lobby. And so creating an environment that people feel welcome. That's crucial. And I guess I'm just going to say a snowball. I had this one quote. I've been dying to say this. We had a member very sadly pass away recently, and she was one of the pivotal anchor points at one of the original Oasis. And her son wrote this lovely email, and he talked about sitting on the front porch is where you meet strangers, and your backyard is to make them friends. And so she described Oasis as the front porch of her life, and that the people became her neighborhood. And that's really a testament to the people themselves. And again, just a neighborhood, a community growing together. So again, getting to know your neighbor.
That's beautiful. I'd like to add something, just because that's, kind of what I do for a living, when it comes to building communities and supporting communities. I think there's never been a time in our history that most of us have been more reflective and aware of how interconnected we are. Here in Toronto and in Canada, but around the world. Something that happens in one place will affect the other. And just like, we impact each other negatively sometimes through actions that humans take. We also, through kindness, through relationships, through sharing information and ideas, we can transmit some amazing, amazing projects that then take a life onto themselves. And so I just wanted to echo what Catherine said, that if you talk to your friends, if you talk to your neighbors, if you have an idea of what you'd like to achieve, especially, and if you build a vision together, nothing's impossible. And it can be really exciting to see it actually come through to fruition.
So we've had a lot of questions just asking for clarification between the difference between Norks and the Oasis program and the butterfly effect. So really trying to clarify, is there a distinction? How are they interconnected? Are they different?
And by the way, small correction, the butterfly effect might actually be more about what I just described, but there is something called the butterfly approach, which is the emotion-focused approach, which I infer the person was describing. So who could take a jab at this to sort of just describe the differences and similarities between all those different features?
I could start. I sort of echoing what Catherine said at the outset. Norks, the naturally occurring retirement community, and it's kind of a definitional challenge because we refer to the Norks, and we're really talking about a Nork that has a set of activities that are organized by residents and in partnership usually with some providers of meals or activities or wellness activities, etc. So Nork is the geographic designation, meaning there's a certain percentage of seniors living in that geographic building, block, rural area. Oasis is the supportive service model. I may not be using quite the right words, but it is coupled with and the geographic designation of a Nork. The butterfly effect. You mentioned that. Certainly the butterfly model of care in long-term care homes is an entirely different sort of topic. But I think where there is a common thread is that it's what Catherine was saying around a place to convene, that front porch, and that emotional connection between neighbors that happens out of the informality of coffee or just spontaneous contact that then spurs on this kind of snowball effect to then sort of morph into, butterfly into, a more organized model of supports in a building. And so it's like a series of steps, but it's confusing, and I see why we're being asked the question, because we do use the term Nork interchangeably to mean really the supportive service organized model.
So just to be clear, so the Nork is the geographical area. Mm-hmm. Oasis is essentially a program.
Right.
And the butterfly approach, typically a term, it's a model used in long-term care and memory care, mm-hmm. Is about a motion-focused initiative to focus on the individual. But it's interesting what you just brought up, Sue, because there is a similarity, isn't there?
Mm-hmm.
In other words, rather than just happening to live around other people, whether it be in a long-term care home or in a neighborhood or in a building, it's about building that sense of community and that sense of purpose and home, right?
Mm-hmm. And connection, emotional connection,
Yes.
looking after each other, right? Yeah.
Catherine, did you want to?
Well, I was just going to ask, and I know Simone and I were knowing that Christine was going to be here, so we didn't talk specifically about Oasis. So I think might be a good time just to clarify a few different elements of it, and Simone can jump in as well. So Oasis, again, it was initiated by Christine Mcmillan, which everyone knows, in partnership with the Kingston Council on Aging. And what it has, it has an on-site coordinator, and this is the key. This is when I say it's a high touch versus the ambassador program. So it's a paid person who's within the NORC, and that person helps facilitate programming on site. And so Tina Carlson has been with the original program for over a decade, and so she's there full time. The other sites that we expanded to had a half-time coordinator. We just honestly didn't have the money, unfortunately, for a full-time. So the person is there on site, living in the working in the building, and so facilitates the programs that the older adults identify. The other piece is a board of directors. So the board of directors, with Helen Cooper as the president in Kingston, and she truly is an impressive force to be reckoned with. She was the previous mayor of Kingston. And again, so it's a community board who really is a strong voice and advocate. You spoke of advocacy. So I'm also going to say a board of directors is crucial. Again, it's a members-driven program, so the members themselves have monthly meetings, and that's a crucial component. And the other piece that I've spoken about is the landlord. And what's required for an Oasis program is space to meet. And so there's a lot of buildings, and this is where I'm going to talk about housing again. A lot of older buildings in areas that may not that may struggle a little bit, may have buildings that don't have space. And so right now, I'm going to say it almost precludes to have an Oasis because you need a place to connect and meet. And so when we were looking at expansion, that was one of the core components, is a place to at least come together. And yeah, I'll leave it at that. But that is the core element of Oasis. And we're happy to pop the website in if you want to learn more. And we've done some work on a manual of how to start an Oasis, so people are more than welcome to take a look. And Simone and I and our colleague Vince DePaul, who's leading this project as well, who's here on the phone, I think, we'll be happy to meet and talk to anyone who would like to learn more.
And by the way, that also answers an earlier question about how do you get Oasis started. Well, good place to start is asking people who have been part of it already. Simone, did you want to add anything as well, given all of your work on it?
I think Catherine summed it up pretty well, so maybe we'll leave it at that.
Wonderful, thank you. Tasha?
Yes, so there's a question. What can we do to start a strategy focused on expanding NORCs that will work hand in glove with the discussion and options that we're talking about tonight? So how do we advocate to the different levels of government? I think that's how that question is really being framed.
Who would like to go there? Stu?
I can start by saying that the earlier question we had about that you gave us, Josh, around the sort of the federal announcement of Age Well at Home, we could be advocating for at least a percentage of that money, say half, to be dedicated towards the Nork Oasis expansion initiative in parts of Canada or all of Canada, depending on the interest. We could be advocating for the Ontario Minister of Seniors and accessibility to be working with communities to help them set up Norks, Oasis models, and also look at some of the funding that has been set aside for redevelopment of buildings in long-term care homes. Why can't we advocate for more funding for almost capital retrofits of some of the existing apartment and or condo buildings that will allow for accessibility and social spaces? Now, this is where Open Lab has done some fabulous work on the vertical aging model and the social space design envisioning, so that there are ideas out there about how to sort of adapt buildings to allow for what Catherine's talking about in terms of places to convene and allowing and enabling more natural connections in hallways or lobbies. Actually, quadrangle architects have come up with some great ideas around how to almost create concierge toned lobbies that allow people to convene. So we could be advocating for some capital money to work on some of the adaptation to buildings that will allow for the Oasis model to grow. The city, I think we need to really advocate for the housing proposals that are being considered right now, the 194,000 new housing units being under consideration by council. How can some of those be looked at in terms of, would they be suitable for a Nork Oasis model or not? If they were, why wouldn't we give them a little bit more of a smooth sail through the approval process? So there's so many ideas of how we could be advocating.
I can assure you that I'm being an active listener wearing a number of hats tonight. So thank you, Sue. So Tasha, I'll go back to you for our next question, just so we make sure we get a number of questions in.
So there is a question about whether or not Norks can be established around neighborhoods where seniors are living alone or with their families dispersed throughout a small geographic area. So not living in the same building, but sort of spread across the community.
Who would like to begin with that? Simone?
I can start. So I think what the question is getting at is can these Nork programs exist within these neighborhood type models of what a naturally occurring retirement community might look like? And I think they can. I think that there hasn't been a lot done to look at that. But one of the challenges that first maybe comes to mind is that the difficulty of finding a communal space. So when it's in an apartment, if there's a common room, that's what you need. But if you're thinking of a neighborhood, whether it's residential or maybe it's mixed and there's some storefronts, et cetera, it becomes a little bit more of a different way to think about it. But I would say that, partnering with the local library, maybe an empty storefront, those are examples of finding that space that could be a communal gathering space for people in the community to go to. And so that is definitely an opportunity, and I'd be interested to see, examples of that that start cropping up around, specifically maybe in an urban center like in Toronto, where there might be more opportunities or closer knit communities around a library or a rec center that could start something like that.
Thank you. Tasha?
So this is a question from the chat. Has anyone thought of taking the Nork model to Toronto community housing units? So Josh, that's like all up in your sort of wheelhouse.
So, when Christine and I first met each other, I was just really interested in what they were doing in Kingston. And it's almost happenstance that the next place that she was focusing on was where she lived, right in the heart of Midtown Toronto, which I ended up being the representative for. So we worked together there with the support of our Member of Parliament Carolyn Bennett and UHN to work with their landlord, as Catherine alluded to earlier, about how important it is to build those relationships. And we identified a common space in the building that would be good for those programs. And to the landlord's credit, they said, you had me at hello, let's do this, let's work together. And it was a really inspiring experience. So, this is a model that is growing in Toronto. I certainly think that whether it be Oasis or inspired by Oasis, this model can work in Toronto community housing. There's already a Toronto community housing version of these kind of programs where there's participatory budgeting, that there's a communal feeling in many of the buildings where the community comes together and makes decisions and works with the staff, votes on things, for example, makes decisions about improvements, etc., and runs programs. Montgomery Place in my ward, for example, on Eglinton, is a wonderful seniors community housing building where they themselves organize everything from concerts to other sorts of events. They even have a drag queen pride event, and it is so much fun. And so I think that, whether it be Oasis or inspired by that type of model, Toronto Community Housing already is doing that, but I think it should be expanded. And to conclude on this, what I described in Montgomery Place isn't happening at every TCHC building. Some TCHC buildings are not places that we'd want anyone we love to live in. And they need to improve, and they need to be become more supportive and caring and safer communities.
Are there any examples of joint intergenerational efforts to form a version of shared community living, even integrated with a NORC that you can share? So I'll probably repeat that because that's a bit of a long question. But are there any examples of joint intergenerational efforts to form a version of shared community living, even integrated with a NORC?
I don't know of any specifically, and I'm going to start off by acknowledging that, our understanding of NORCs is just really growing at this point. And so a lot of these questions are, I'm going to say, just really good questions. And we don't necessarily have the answer to, but it makes us ponder and reflect of what could be more than anything. And I also want to acknowledge too that we're talking about Oasis as if you can just get money to start an Oasis. We have been struggling ourselves. We have the one site in Kingston has stable funding, but that's the only example of stable long-term funding for an Oasis. So the Lynn in Southwest provided some short-term funding. Central Lynn has also provided short-term funding. So we ourselves, expanded on research dollars. So, I think this question about how do you advocate, we're actually trying to sort that out ourselves. And so the answers that I'm giving, Simone's giving, and Sue's giving are probably just, what we hope we're doing right. And so I'm getting a little off track here, and I'm forgetting what the question is, but I will say there has been some examples, for instance, in Hamilton, McMaster, paired students and older adults, but not in a NORC, actually. It was more in younger adult housing that older adults move to. But this intergenerational, this idea is an excellent one as well. And, we have examples in one of our Oasis buildings that people, for instance, rent rooms to the Queen students. So we haven't made that a thing, but, there could be ways that we could leverage that a little bit more.
I would just add that from the work I'm doing on a housing solutions lab with CMHC funding, seniors are saying that they want the social supports and the kinds of offerings that an Oasis type model will give them, but they also don't want to live in exclusively a seniors building or community. And so that fine balance of intergenerational plus the kinds of supports and camaraderie that come with people of peers of your own age, it's a mix that we haven't yet found. And I think there are some co-housing communities where there is intergenerational collaboration and community sharing of common spaces and so on. That's an intentional group that have set up to be a intergenerational collaborative co-housing community. But when it comes to sort of buildings or blocks where there are predominant or a high proportion of seniors, how do you keep it from tipping the balance so that it's not all seniors? Like, that's something we have to really think about, I think, as the model evolves and expands. I don't know of great examples yet to answer the question. So something to really follow and monitor.
What I love about these kind of town hall formats is that as much as we impart information to those who are participating, some of the best ideas come from the people who ask questions and then often inspire our work as well. So I really appreciate those really thoughtful questions and comments. Tasha, back to you.
So one last question, and it's a simple one just to wrap us up. Are there any databases that identify NORCs across either Ontario or across Canada?
Catherine.
I can speak to the work that one of our statisticians did for us. And again, it was using the Canada Census data. But I'm going to use this example. I've said it before, but for anyone who looks at houses on MLS, if you go on to MLS and if you look at, there's a little tab that says demographics, neighborhood. That actually is a dissemination area. And in that dissemination area, it will actually show the percentage of age groups. And so you yourself can actually go, if you're looking at an apartment building, go onto MLS, find a house that's for sale in that geography, and you can literally figure out not exactly if that apartment building, but in that small region, again, they're just very small regions. And that will give you a very kind of rudimentary understanding if you're living in a Nork. But again, if you want to connect with us, we can provide some of that Stats Canada data to you. And again, it's open access data. This isn't hidden anywhere. You can look for it yourself.
So Tasha, I'm going to start wrapping up the meeting just because I'm cognizant of the time. And I want to say a few words of appreciation. First of all, the reason that I've moderated both of these town hall meetings is because I am such a huge supporter of the Toronto Council on Aging. Their advocacy and the way that they bring us together, as evidenced tonight, is so important and so powerful because of exactly what Sue said at the beginning, which is that, you know, we, as difficult as this pandemic has been and as tragic as it has been for so many people, it's also an opportunity to reflect and rethink how older adults are cared for, treated, and how they live out their years. We have an opportunity to recreate our society in a way that is more respectful and caring. Everything from how we design our parks and our streets and our public realm to our buildings, to how we live and how we provide services and care for each other. There is no us and them when we talk about aging. If we all are fortunate, we all will age to a great age. So this is really for all of us and for those we love. I want to thank the panelists. You are amazing people, professionally and personally. And I say that personally because you wouldn't be doing what you are doing if you weren't devoted to changing the world for people. And I really respect you, and I really learned a lot from you. And Tasha, thank you very much for your leadership. And I also want to just acknowledge Christine before I wrap up and hand it back to Tasha for a closing comment. Christine Mcmillan is a remarkable leader. I'm sorry that it didn't work out for her to be here tonight, but I know that she always likes to impart advice and information to people who contact her. So back to you, Tasha, for a little bit about how we can support the TCA.
Yes. So on behalf of the Board of Directors, I would like to thank the panelists today. I would like to also thank Josh for stepping in and moderating both parts of our Town Hall series. It is really, really appreciated. We really thank you for dedicating your time today to impart knowledge on our TCA community. If you have enjoyed today's webinar and would like to receive information on similar events and our upcoming programs, I encourage you to visit our website, torontocouncilonaging.com, and sign up to join our mailing list. Please also consider making a donation so that we as the TCA can continue to offer free educational events. For those of you who are not yet members of the TCA, please consider joining our TCA community to receive exclusive access to our newsletter and other perks. We offer a variety of packages with individual membership starting as low as $20 per year. We will be sharing a recording of today's webinar in the coming weeks. Please look out for it. For those who were unable to attend part 1 of the Town Series, there is a recording of the session posted on our YouTube channel. Thank you everyone for attending our webinar today, and please have a good evening and stay well.